Welcome to our weekly Zoom news conference. I'm Sandy Close, Director of Ethnic Media Services. Today, our topic is QAnon, domestic terrorism, and the threat to democracy. Our speakers will discuss the conspiracies, disinformation, and extremist groups behind the January 6th insurrection.
Excuse me, can you hear an echo? I'm sorry, can you hear an echo?
The conspiracies. Sorry about that. We are testing out a live streaming and
yeah, you have to mute whatever comes out of the live stream.
Let me just pick up again. Today our topic is QAnon, domestic terrorism, and the threat to democracy. Our speakers will discuss the conspiracies, the disinformation, and the extremist groups behind the January 6th insurrection, and the role of religion in the radicalization of some Americans, including minority ethnic groups. Our speakers include Maylee Kriasis, a program associate with the Polarization and Extremism Research Innovation Lab, known as PERIL, at American University in Washington, D.C., which recently released a report on QAnon. Colin P. Clark, a former researcher with RAND, now with Carnegie Mellon's Institute for Politics and Strategy, and Ricardo Corzo Moreno, a theologian specializing in Latino churches, former president of the multi-ethnic group of the Presbyterian Church of the United States. We will send extended bios for each speaker along with collateral research after the call. We look forward to taking your questions, which we ask you to enter in the chat box. Our thanks to Blue Shield of California Foundation, the State Infrastructure Fund, and the Ford Foundation for their support of these briefings. Thanks to our coordinators, Pilar Marrero and Sunita Saravji, and to our interpreters, Oscar Arteta and Jackie No, who provide simultaneous interpreting in Spanish and Korean. Above all, thanks to our reporters for covering today's briefing. Now I turn the conference over to our moderator, Pilar Marrero.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, everyone. And the reason we're talking about this on Inauguration Week is because it is very important, and it's an undercurrent that's going to continue to be with us for the immediate future, and which threatens not just families and relationships, but the country in many ways. So I'm going to first introduce Maylee Kriasis from PERIL, the Polarization and Extremism Research Innovation Lab at American University. Thank you for agreeing to be with us, Maylee. You were part of a group that recently published a very important analysis on QAnon. And we want you, and we hope that you will illuminate for us what the summary of what your report said about this conspiracy theory or this group, whatever you call it. Thank you so much for being with us. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much for having me, and good afternoon, good evening, whatever your time zones are. It's a pleasure meeting you all, and again, thanks for having me. So the first thing I think that might be great to cover is the how QAnon originally came into being. So QAnon, interestingly, is rooted in an earlier conspiracy, which I'm sure you all have probably heard of. It's called Pizzagate, which stemmed from a conspiracy theory on 4chan in 2016, actually, and it included this Pizzagate conspiracy, the core belief that a cabal of elites were abusing children, and that these conspirators were located in various places around the country, various restaurants, including the famous Pizzagate restaurant. So once an individual who had become violent in relation to this conspiracy drove to the restaurant, thinking that he would free the children from the satanic cabal, and carried out an attempt of violence. So right off the bat, there was an individual on record of taking violent action in connection to believing that there is some sort of satanic conspiracy, child abusing cabal. So in 2017, almost a year later, an individual began posting on 4chan under the name of Q Clearance Patriot, and eventually these posts became known as Q drops. So what these posts were supposed to do were they included kind of these very vague tips about what is going on in the inside of this cabal, elite government. So this individual claimed to have access to a very high level of clearance called Q clearance. And this is why the individual was leaving these drops as a quote insider, trying to help everyone else on the outside connect the dots and eventually overturn these this conspiratorial plot of powerful elites. So this is where QAnon basically stemmed from. And it's important to state that even before QAnon came onto the scene, there were other conspiracies, for example, on 4chan under the name of posters like FBI Anon, CIA Anon. So it's not like this is necessarily new, but how it became popular is much in part to the fact that a YouTuber with a large subscriber following and two 4chan moderators kind of got this going. So once it hit YouTube, it kind of started to branch out and attract a lot of attention. And then eventually, when it became a lot more mainstream, is when it started hitting more mainstream conservative spaces. And individuals like Sean Hannity and Roseanne Barr, the actress in that, I forgot, it's that show. But anyway, so
Roseanne.
Right. So when these two individuals started picking this up, it kind of really blasted much more into the mainstream, and it really began to pick up a lot of attention.
Maylee, could I just ask you to slow down a little bit? Our interpreters are trying to follow you, and it's a little fast.
Oh, sure. So sorry. Let me know when I can start up again. I don't want to get too far.
No, please just keep going. It's okay.
Oh, okay. So what are the core beliefs of QAnon? Basically, the two major elements of this conspiracy include the belief that that the world is controlled by a satanic cabal of pedophile elites. They are also referred to as the deep state. And then the second core belief is Q's prediction that these individuals will be exposed and executed when the reckoning arrives. And this day of reckoning is also referred frequently as the storm. So phrases like the storm is coming, or even when President Donald Trump had said the calm before the storm, a lot of individuals that had become interested in QAnon and started making their way down the rabbit hole, they picked this up as, yes, this is signaling from the president, that he's working in tandem with Q and that he is on our side. So all we have to do is, take these messages that the president of the United States is releasing out, put it together with the Q drops, and we just need to follow Q, trust in the plan, and believe that eventually this day of reckoning will come, the calm before the storm, basically, that the storm will arrive. So,
Maylee, still a little bit too fast for the translator.
Oh no, my apologies. Please let me know if I should repeat.
Your brain goes really fast.
Please let me know if I should go back on anything. I'm of course happy to.
Yeah, just slow down a little bit.
Okay, let's see, and please let me know. I'll try to. Let's see, and so in relation to the most recent events with the insurrection, as you all probably saw in the photos coming out from that day, a lot of individuals who partook in these violent actions were wearing symbols like Q on their T-shirt, the Q shaman, as I'm sure we all famously know, and also Ashley Babbitt, one of the 5 fatalities from that day. When reporters and researchers looked into her past, it was very clear that she was a QAnon proponent. So there was a lot of Q action, a lot of Q online as well, because I also look at online spaces. There was a lot of discussion about, this is the moment of the storm. That was one of the things being put out there online among these QAnon conspiracy theorists. So in relation to, current politics, it's very interesting because a significant portion of Donald Trump supporters have been, you know, attracted to this QAnon conspiracy theory. And I guess it's interesting to think about what this could mean for the GOP itself and the future of the GOP, because if a large segment of GOP supporters have kind of segmented into this QAnon conspiracy theory stuff, it means that the GOP must contend with this conspiratorial group within its own party. And there are even, it's important to state too, that there are even Congress people who have been elected who are very overtly pro QAnon. So, and actually one senator, I believe, he actually was removed from office. He was voted out and replaced with a QAnon member, which he was not too happy about. So this is definitely something that the GOP must contend with, and it could be a problem. So I guess in terms of real quick, just to kind of close it up, is there after the official inauguration of Biden, the official swearing in, it's all over. A lot of QAnon individuals online seem to express a lot of disenchantment. They were shocked. They were very upset. The cognitive dissonance that they have been holding for so long, it was made very apparent to a lot of supporters. So they expressed, a lost in trust of the plan. Like, why did I trust this plan? Why did I invest so much of my time, so much of my effort and belief in something that is completely falling apart before my eyes? However, it is also important to state that there are also individuals who are responding by digging in further. So they are expressing further loyalty to trusting the plan. So they want to remain steadfast and belief of this QAnon conspiracy. And then, so there will always be, individuals who continue to move the goalpost. There will be individuals, I'm sure, who are disillusioned, and hopefully they will be able to leave this conspiracy behind after spending so much time, in this kind, pretty dark space. And it's also, we should think maybe about how could these conspiracies even evolve? How could they arise? What new conspiracies could spin off from Q? Like maybe people do not trust Q anymore, but the elements of often anti-Semitic, by the way, the whole idea of a cabal and a globalist elite, a lot of anti-Semitism is also heavily involved. How can these elements, come together and coalesce to create offshoot conspiracies that we will still have to deal with in the age of disinformation, misinformation, and national security? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maylee. And there's a number of questions in the chat. Let's see. There's some really specific questions here that I think are interesting. So where are the Q spaces online now that Parler, Gab, and similar sites have shut down? I will also add that Facebook and Twitter finally took off thousands of pages that had to do with Q. Personally, I know and I follow QAnon groups on Telegram and WhatsApp. So maybe in these private networks, they're still up. What's your take on that, Maylee? Where are they meeting now?
So right now, a platform that I personally monitor heavily is Telegram, but they are, still very much on places like 4chan. Although Facebook is trying to remove them, and they're doing a good job. Twitter as well. They still find a way to kind of loop back onto these spaces regardless. But yeah, I think on these message boards like 4chan, 8chan, 9chan, pretty much they are kind of everywhere. But right now, a lot of individuals, including other extremist groups like white supremacists, are flocking right now to Telegram. So the Q community has found a very stable place as it is right now on Telegram specifically.
Okay, I'm gonna let people ask their own questions. Sorry about that. Srishti Prabha has a question.
Hi. Yeah, my question is, I have a two-part question. So one, how can QAnon be addressed by the GOP without fueling that fire? Because as you said, the more traction they gain, it's coming from people talking about them. And the other would be, do you have some sort of data breakdown on the demographics of the QAnon supporters?
Sure. So to the first part, in terms of how ways that the GOP could deal with this issue, I think they must have a united force in saying that, we are, as a major political party in the U.S., we have our differences with the Democrats, for example, but this isn't a political issue. This is an issue about using misinformation and disinformation to fool people and to bring them into a very conspiratorial network, and possibly also dangerous space where violent individuals have in fact, carried out violent actions that are part of the QAnon community, so to speak. So I think it would be best for the GOP to emphasize the importance of sticking to the facts. And that way you don't insult your own supporters, but what you could tell them is say, hey, these things that are being put out there, they hurt the United States, they hurt us as a country. We don't want that. We're an American political party, and we must be cognizant of sticking to the facts. And
what about the demographic data? Do you have any demographic data on?
So I don't have myself and at Peril, we do not track necessarily specific demographic data, but what is interesting though, and what other researchers have really dug into is the global phenomenon that is QAnon, because this is not just in the United States, it's in places like Canada. Germany apparently has a pretty big Q following, Japan. So it's definitely has spread to a lot of countries in the way that these conspiracies take place in other countries. They are specific to that environment. So they won't necessarily follow the American context. It's also formed by the local wider context as well.
Meili, did anything surprise you when you were working on that report?
Ooh, I don't think so, because the thing is that these conspiracies with the whole idea of a nefarious a nefarious group of individuals controlling things, it's definitely not new, the basis of these conspiracies. But I guess in terms of the way it took off originally, like that's definitely very unfortunate, and it was perfect timing, in the environment of a 2016 election, all the political tension, division, the increase of disinformation, and the ability for a lot of decentralized networks forming online, and as well as on encrypted apps like Telegram.
Okay, there's a lot of questions in the chat that actually I think will be addressed by the following speakers. So let's just move to the second speaker. And Meili, can you stay with us so you can answer more questions a bit later?
Absolutely. So. And would it be okay if I actually drop some names in the chat that might be helpful for reporters, researchers who research QAnon? They might find this very helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah, I even want to have that too.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, so we're going to move to our second speaker, and that is Colin P. Clark. He is a senior research fellow at the Soufan Center. He was previously with RAND as well, and his research focuses on terrorism, insurgency, and criminal networks. Welcome, Mr. Clark. Thank you so much for being with us. Can you illuminate us as to who were the groups that were there on January 6th, beyond QAnon? Who are they, and what's the threat here?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's really nice to be able to speak with everybody today, studying what I think is a really important topic. So some of the groups that were at the Capitol insurrection, I think, when we talk about the far right, this is really a very broad umbrella. It's a broad tent. And underneath there, you've got both, kind of formal organizations, and those include groups like the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the Three Percenters. But you've also got a very kind of loose collection, decentralized kind of network. And that's a hodgepodge of everything from QAnon adherents to, I think, what I would call really religious zealots or religious extremists, Christian evangelicals that see Trump as the second coming of Christ. I mean, they say as much in their kind of propaganda. And then interspersed among them, and this was reflected in some of the clothing that you probably saw in the images of the Capitol, you have white supremacists and neo-Nazis, like the individual with the Camp Auschwitz shirts. Others had signs that said 6 million wasn't enough in reference to the Holocaust. So, you know, one of the things that I try to explain to people is that this is such, the far right's not a monolith. And as a heads up, I have an op-ed dropping in the New York Times this Sunday, talking about what I call the, you know, the new far right, for those interested. They're more unified by what they're against than what they're actually for. I think they're, you know, it's quite an inchoate, you know, ideology to the sense that it is an ideology. And I agree with Meili in that, you know, there's a very heavy dose of anti-Semitism that's kind of serves as the connective tissue, as it were, between many of these groups. In some of them, you see aspects of extreme misogyny as well, especially the kind of Proud Boys and some of the kind of white supremacists. And these are topics, actually, I'm close with Cynthia Miller-Idris, who works with at Peril with Meili and some of the other folks there. In September 2019 at the Soufan Center, we released a paper called Looking at the Transnational Nature of Violent White Supremacy, and kind of mapping out some of these networks abroad. And one of the arguments that we make, you know, we kind of compare the jihadi phenomena to the white supremacist phenomenon, and there's a lot of similarities, even in the way that they recruit, in the way that they spread propaganda. There's a very strange fascination that white supremacists have with jihadis. In fact, they even use the term white jihad, and in many ways, they lionize Osama bin Laden. So, you know, you wouldn't think that those two things would coexist, but they do. Ukraine, in particular, has served as the equivalent of Afghanistan, as Afghanistan did for the jihadis. It's become a kind of training space for them. It's become the center of an international network of people from all over the world. And if you actually might be able to pull up the Soufan Center report and dump it into the chat for everybody, because we've got data in there that actually breaks down the number of foreign fighters and where they're from. We've also done individual reports on two other violent white supremacist groups, one known as Adam Waffen, and the other known as the Russian Imperial Movement. And the Russian Imperial Movement is a group that the State Department has now designated as a specially designated global terrorist entity. That is the first white supremacist group that the US State Department has ever designated. In conversations with folks, conversations I've had with folks that are thinking about the Biden administration, what to do next, this is at the top of the list. In fact, you know, right before the call, I noticed that there was an announcement made by the Biden administration about how they plan to tackle this threat. So there's been tasking sent down to ODNI, which is the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, that's going to request a comprehensive threat assessment with the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security. You've also got the National Security Council undertaking policy review and then coordinating with the federal government. So it's going to be a comprehensive threat assessment on what domestic violent extremism is the term that they use. So you may see this acronym DVE for domestic violent extremism. Another acronym is REMV. And that stands for racially and ethnically motivated violent extremism. There's a real kind of struggle right now within the federal government, within think tanks and academia, to settle on the proper terminology. And I think, you know, it's going to be just one of many challenges we have as we kind of think about how to combat this threat. The other major challenge is that we don't have a domestic terrorism designation. So the equivalent that we have for what we call FTOs, or foreign terrorist organizations, that does not exist domestically. So many people are surprised to learn that the KKK is not a terrorist group. Sure seems like one to me, based on the way that this group has acted throughout history, right? but legally, it's not. It's not designated as one. And there are a number of historical reasons why that's the case. I don't have any inside information to share, but I do get the sense that the Biden administration will likely put that issue on the table and consider it. Now, there's a lot of pitfalls there. Civil liberties, privacy, First Amendment, right, that come into play. And those have to be carefully weighed against any benefits from a domestic terrorism statute. One solution that folks have floated that I think is quite appealing is making domestic terrorism a federal crime. So there, it stops short of giving the president the power to designate a group. And one of the reasons why lawmakers have been weary of giving the president those powers, and I think looking at the behavior of President Trump, we now see how dangerous this could have been had he had that kind of ability to designate groups, is that they could simply designate their political opponents and people. And the president threatened on multiple occasions to designate Antifa. Some people believe he may have tried to designate Black Lives Matter as a terrorist group if he had the ability to do that. So there's a lot of really concerning issues around that. Now, to go back to the making domestic terrorism a federal crime, that stops short of the designation, but it does give authorities more tools, more resources to deal with the threat. And that can include things like mandatory reporting requirements. And I think, that's been an issue. My own sense is that has actually been underreported in this country and undercounted because hate crimes are considered a separate category. And there's many cases where, violence has been perpetrated against, racial and ethnic minorities that could likely be qualified in this category. And again, look at the history of the KKK. How you could argue that that's not terrorism, I'm not sure. Now we start getting into differences of, law and policy, but a lot of it comes down at the end of the day. So, sorry, I know I'm a reformed college professor, so if I have a tendency to ramble and just kind of, as my daughters tell me.
There are questions. There are questions, Colin. Can you answer a couple?
Yeah. So, how can the CIA, FBI, and other federal agencies responsible for protecting our country address this issue? So, yeah, it's really first and foremost an FBI issue on the domestic front, right? The CIA has got responsibility for international, but now there, where we see these linkages between American citizens and groups operating internationally, now we can work with partners and allies overseas to share information and to cooperate on matters of intelligence, extradition, if possible, surveillance, reconnaissance, and others. What role?
So more than one person has mentioned to ask if there is foreign government involvement in this stuff that's going on. So
people have asked me this for about 2 years, and my answer was always, my gut instinct is yes. I believe it's the Russians, but I'm looking for data and I'm looking for empirical evidence. I think we're getting really close to that. In fact, there was a report by a company named Chainalysis that looked at a number of funds that were deposited via Bitcoin to help fund individuals involved with the insurrection. I have to look into it further. My sense is that we're going to trace those back to entities overseas and very likely Russia.
Sunita has a question. Sunita, can you ask your question?
Just to clarify, Colin, so you mentioned that the far right has an interest in jihadi. I'm wondering if you see a correlation there then between the rise of hate crimes against Muslims and people perceived to be Muslims, which we've typically attributed to the far right.
And their interest in jihadis?
Yeah, well, yeah, you were saying earlier that there's an interest in jihadis, and they
Yeah.
consider themselves white jihadis.
So, yes.
So could we still hold them responsible for the rise in hate crimes against?
Yeah. So to be clear, they have an admiration for the way that these groups operate, but they still very much hate Muslims. They hate anyone that's not white and that they feel does not belong in a white ethno state. Their stated goal, and this is their words, not mine, is to engage in what they call Rahowa. So I know I'm actually a New Yorker originally, and I've kind of lost my New York accent, but sometimes my speech isn't that clear. So that stands for racial holy war. And that's one of the things that they believe in. There's another thread within here of it's something called accelerationism. And there's many adherents in the far right that are accelerationists. And they essentially believe that the only way to bring about a new government and a white ethno state is to completely destroy the current system. And that's by attacking the government, collapsing the economy. In fact, when COVID-19 happened, this was like a dream come true for them, because this was kind of a call to many of their prayers. They're saying, look, this is the beginning of the end. And it featured prominently in a lot of their propaganda that we track and monitor online. Coupled on top of it, the really inept and pathetic and substandard response to the COVID-19 pandemic by the Trump administration only played further into their hands and contributed to further conspiracies that actually Trump was actively working to undermine the very government that he sought to lead and represent. And I mean, if you watch the way that he behaved, it seemed kind of plausible, even though, it was more apathy than it was, I think, deliberate undermining.
Colin, there's a question here, and I don't know, Joel, do you want to ask your question, Joel Umansor?
Yes, I was just curious as to, I know that, like you said, there's a lot of racial undertones and not even undertones, overt racism in these movements. But we often see like Black and brown faces being put to the forefront to kind of normalize them to the mainstream. I'm curious as to that recruitment being tactical, or are these sympathizers going out of their way to find these movements?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think you're referring to Enrique Otero, the leader of the Proud Boys.
Yeah,
who's
the Cuban Proud Boy. Yeah,
I mean, that's what a researcher would call a small n, right? That's the plural of anecdote is not data. That's kind of just one example, but by and large, this is a white movement. I think that was probably a strategic move, a deliberate move. It beyond just being kind of white, what people call the Proud Boys alt-right or white nationalist adjacent. I think they're first and foremost a kind of chauvinist, misogynist group. So, and we know that there's no barrier to entry there by skin color. We have chauvinists and misogynists of every, color, creed, and race. So, but I don't know in terms of like active outreach to individuals there. I would have to imagine it's rather uncomfortable to be a person of color being recruited by a white supremacist or a white nationalist group of like, well, what's going on here? What's the end game for me?
I've seen more than Tarrio. Tarrio is one of the faces, but I've seen Mexicans who are avowed white supremacists. And when you look at their faces, I mean, I don't think anyone else in those groups really want them in there. It's really absurd. So I'm going to ask one more question and then go to our third speaker. So police officers and former military were identified as part of the group that assaulted Capitol. So what is the problem there? That seems to be a problem.
Yeah, and there was a really interesting, I'm going to try to find it real quick and dump it in the chat, NPR story yesterday that, here we go, that suggested nearly 1 in 5 of the people arrested for the Capitol insurrection were former military. So if it's accurate that 1% of the population serves, yet 20% of the insurrectionists were military, that's highly disproportionate. It's telling, it's quite problematic. And that's not even including individuals with strictly law enforcement training. So if you add them into the mix, that number goes even higher. Now, I think that's both a push and pull mechanism, in my opinion. I think these groups are actively recruiting veterans because, you know, they have training they have weapons training in most cases. They have training in operations security, or what we call OPSEC, in tradecraft. And not only does it bring a certain prestige or street cred to a group, right, to have combat veterans in their ranks, but I think it's also a force multiplier for the group from a tactical perspective. I was watching video of the Capitol insurrection, and there's one scene where there's a broken window and you have somebody who's got a two-way walkie-talkie and an earpiece in, and he's telling people, next two in, next two in, next two in. And it was almost like they were storming an objective in Iraq. I mean, it was clear military training the way that it was happening. So when I say push and pull, I think groups are trying to actively recruit these people, and these individuals, in some cases, are actively seeking out these groups once they leave. If I could plug one book, and it's not my own, there's a book called Bring the War Home by Kathleen Belew. And it was, you know, a real education for me in kind of learning the history of white nationalism. And she talks about how there was a surge in recruitment for groups like the KKK after every major war in this country, after World War I, after World War II, and then after Vietnam especially. And there's all sorts of different reasons why she feels that this happened. She's an historian at the University of Chicago, and another person that's been studying this topic since before it became trendy.
Mr. Clark, thank you so much. And if you can stay around for a few minutes, that would be great. If not, we understand.
I apologize. I do have to scoot right to the next thing. And but thank you very much for having me. And please keep in touch. It was very informative. Thank you.
We will.
All right.
We will.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Have a nice weekend.
You too. Well, that was fantastic. The first two. So now we go to the three. Ricardo, are you on? So you turned off your video.
Yes, I am.
Okay. Are you having problems with the internet? Okay. All right.
No,
okay. Let's. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen.
Okay.
So.
Please go ahead. Ricardo Corzo Moreno, he's a theologian specializing in Latino churches and former president of the multi-ethnic group of the Presbyterian Church in the United States. He served as director of Latino relations for Bread for the World from 2005 to 2015. And he's going to talk to us about the link of all this with evangelical churches.
Okay, hold on, I'm trying to, I'm a co-host now?
Yes, you are a co-host. You should be able to share your screen.
Okay, hold on. Hold on. It's not allowing me to share screen.
It should allow you. If you can't, then just go on and speak.
Okay, hold on, I'm trying to.
I don't know if maybe it's okay.
I'm having problems.
Nasan or Jessica over there, can you share the presentation that was sent to you last night? Ricardo's presentation?
Because.
Sure, Pilar.
Okay.
Okay, they'll share it, Ricardo.
Okay, perfect.
Apologize, guys. It's a bit of technical stuff.
Yeah. Okay, go back and then I will go saying following.
It disappeared. Oh, okay. Oh, it's because of your internet. That's the problem. Okay.
Yeah. Christian symbols were in full display at the Capitol. Next. You will see, I can see the screen in my computer.
Yeah, it disappeared again. I don't know what's going on.
Let's just ask Ricardo to speak, and we can send the slides later.
My presentation, you can mail to people.
Yes.
Basically, you saw at the Capitol Christian religious symbols, displays. You saw the Bible, you saw the cross, you saw the rosary, you saw people with preaching cartels, Jesus saves. You saw people kneeling and praying, using Christian worship. Even before the assault on the Capitol, people prayed and people were invoking God's names into the action they were to perform. So the question we have to ask is, why Christians, Latinos, and also white and other ethnicities participated in these events? And you can see a religious element, especially in the Latino community. Latinos are really religious. In the US, 70% of Latinos are Catholics. Another 25% are evangelicals. Especially here, you can see 50% of them are what they call born-again evangelicals, and only 8% of Latinos don't affiliate with any religion. Next. So this is according to the Pew Research Center. So the religion has, or the faith has, a really strong component in the community. And something that you have to understand is that for a lot of the evangelicals, the Bible is really central to what they believe. You know, the Bible is the book. It's like in Islam, you know, the Quran is the book. So part of the issue is how you approach the Bible, because the Bible is a really complex book. So a lot of these evangelical churches, Pentecostal churches, they have what we call a literal understanding of the Bible. So they read the Bible and they apply the Bible as it is to the present context. So within the Bible, you have different kind of literature. One of them is what they call prophetic literature, or also apocalyptic literature. So in the evangelical and the Pentecostal understanding of the literal understanding, they take a lot of these scriptures as literal. So they read the Bible from a literal point of view. Now, they are influenced by the Anglo-white conservative leaders of the evangelical world, who has translated a lot of the literature into Spanish. In the 90s, it was this famous series called Left Behind. I don't know if you're familiar with, but it was a series of books by Tim LaHaye that was apocalyptic fiction, where he describes the world after the rapture, because they believe the chosen one are going to be raptured and going to be taken away. According to the Bible, they believe that this will happen. And this is sometimes I will laugh because I'll be driving in the highway 101 and you will see someone with a sticker and the bumper saying, please be careful. If the raptures occur, this vehicle will be with a driver. You know, it's crazy. Or you are in a plane and the pilot is born again, the pilot is going to disappear. They believe that is tough because the part of the Bible refers to the rapture. Let's go to the next if we can. So this has a big influence in the evangelical world. Left Behind It was a bestseller book, 65 million copies as 2016. And this is only the books, but they have videos, they have, etc. Let's go next. So, let's see if we can, okay. So, a strong component is what they call dispensations. They believe that God acted in particular ways, and the miracles and prophecies were assigned to early dispensations and would only return as a signs of the end of the world. So they believe the history of the world is divided into different dispensations. Let's go to next. Okay, well, they believe that the Bible prophesies the end of the world and that the end of the world is near, and this occurred through demonic forces operating through human institutions. Go next. This is why in many of these groups, the mentality is that international institutions like the UN are devil-oriented, because maybe through the UN, there will be a huge big government that will rule the whole world with the Antichrist. Next. So here comes Donald Trump. For many of these evangelicals, Donald Trump, according to a lot of the prophecies they receive in churches, he was the anointing by God. And this is really important to understand. This is a theological concept. When you talk to evangelicals, that someone is anointed by God, in Spanish we say el ungido, el escogido. So for a lot of Latino conservative evangelicals, they didn't saw Trump only as a political leader or as a candidate or as a president. He was chosen by God, according to the prophecies, to something. Let's go next. So he bent elements of the Christianity to his will, and many Latino evangelicals have remade their faith into his image. Again, there were many prophecies that will state that Donald Trump will be reelected. Next, and almost getting to the end, Pilar. So, no previous president, no even Bush, did much to push through the Christian right agenda on social policy or gave hardliners evangelicals such exclusive access to the president. And let me put just an example. Next. Only Trump proved willing to take the ill-advised foreign policy step of moving the U.S. embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem because of evangelicals' extreme belief about biblical prophecy. And part of the prophecy says that once Jerusalem becomes the center of the world, they will have Armageddon, and there will be a huge big war, and will be the end of the world, and then Jesus will come for second time. This is why evangelicals were pushing and were so happy that Trump decided to move the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Next. So, the embrace of a strong man like Trump flows really logical, because in the evangelical theology and subculture, there is this authoritarian nature. Like, you know, if you are a pastor of a big, huge mega church, then you become your own self, and you are the preacher, and you are the prophet, and you are God chosen. This is why these many Latino and white mega church pastors supported Trump. For example, the New York Times reported about members of the white supremacy group, the Proud Boys, offering up a clearly evangelical prayer before going to the assault of the Capitol. Next. I'm getting to them now. Two examples, I wrote about it. Apostle Guillermo Maldonado, huge, big mega church in Florida with a lot of documented people, part of the church, one of the biggest Latino churches in the US, supporting Donald Trump because all this theology that Trump was chosen by God. Next, and I'm done. Pastor Samuel Rodriguez. He was out there supporting Trump because all this evangelical theology that Trump was the chosen one and he was the man for the moment. I will stop here and apologies about the technical difficulty.
Ricardo, muchas gracias. Thank you. I believe you tied the whole thing together. It's like everyone presented a part and then now we tie it together. So I guess I will ask one question. And I think this is something that has been said by the Atlantic Magazine executive editor, Adrienne LaFrance, who was going to be with us today, but couldn't at the last minute. She has written several times that QAnon has the makings of a new American religion. For example, like Mormonism. What do you think about that, Ricardo? Do you think that's what we're seeing, the birth of a religion?
Yes, and I'm worried about that because it's not only in the US, but it's spreading through the whole world. Here in Latin America, the whole evangelical Latino world went crazy when Trump lost the election. And you can follow whatever they were saying in Christian TV, Christian radio, Christian newspapers. They were like, no, it's the evil world. The truth will prevail. The truth will come out. The truth will come out. And then. And until today now, they are saying that Joe Biden is the devil, that Joe Biden is a demon, that he's going to destroy Christianity, So it's really growing, especially among the more kind of independent conservative churches, because the evangelical world is really complex and really, really broad. So you can say all evangelicals, but yes, there are sectors who are really aligning with these QAnon theories, conspiracies, and all of that.
Okay, let's go to some questions in the chat and also for Meili. I think Meili could ask this question, or maybe she can say something about it. Meili, is there a link between QAnon and drug cartels that we know about?
Oh, so unfortunately, I can't speak to that, but maybe another, well, actually, I think Ricardo, he's the only other panelist here, but maybe Ricardo or some of the experts I listed in the chat might be able to answer that.
No, I don't think so. Colin is gone. Julia, ask your question, please. Julia McEvoy.
Yeah, sorry. I was just wondering if we have any idea how many Latinx evangelicals would fall into these groups that have this theology that allows them to believe that Trump is appointed by God. Do we have any clue from the, various different evangelical communities, what percentage of them would be involved in this kind of thinking? How is this a very small, weird, like outlying group, or is this a sort of growing mainstream new religion, as somebody just called it?
Ricardo.
That's a good question. Well, the data that we have from the Pew Research Center states that we have like 12 million Latinos who are evangelicals in the US. In Latin America, it's huge. It's like 70, is growing. But it's really hard to say now with, with research and data, how many of those. But from what I see and what I follow, WhatsApp groups, Facebook pages, chats, it's growing. I would say it's a minority now, but it's growing. And some influential pastors are getting into this. So I think that's a challenge for the future.
Ricardo, what can we do? What can ethnic media reporters, writers do?
That's a really good question, Pilar. I love ethnic media. I appreciate the work because I know very well how hard ethnic media tries to do with little resources. First of all, I would recommend that you cover religion. Ethnic media seldom cover religion. you need to follow up religion and don't leave that only for the mainstream huge media. Then second, try to get a good credible sources when you talk about religion. You know, if you're talking about evangelicals, go to credible universities and seminaries and get good theologians. Also in the Islamic community, go to the imam, go to the Islamic center, also to the synagogue, etc. That would be my second advice. Then my third will be cover stories of people who have been affected by this kind of fundamentalists and fanatics. There are people out there who grew up in these environments and they are really affected, and also groups who are affected. So cover the stories and quote them, because usually when you only quote the dominant story and you don't quote the people who are affected. And last but not less, please go back to Journalism 101, check your sources, because what I read sometimes is that reporters made a story about a pastor or about this preacher, and they don't check the facts, what he says to be true. So it's always good to check your sources. I don't give anything for granted.
I think Pastor Rodriguez is an example of that, Ricardo. I'm going to ask one question of Meili Kriesis. What worries you the most after doing this work or this report, or in your ongoing work about the QAnon conspiracy theory?
I think one of the more concerning aspects of QAnon is that it's, as Colin said earlier, it's a big tent conspiracy. So you see it sucking up a lot of elements that maybe were not ever even part of that Q community, but they are able to bring in people that, you know, for example, believe in alien conspiracy theories, you know, a lot of side stuff that they are bringing in into the Q community. And I think in terms of future political violence, it's very concerning to think about individuals that decide not to leave the group, because some will, some are feeling disillusioned, and hopefully they make that decision to leave. But for those who don't and start to maybe even to develop future like spin-off conspiracies, there's always the question of, you know, what could this new reincarnation of a different, possibly different conspiracy look like? Will they stick? I mean, there will be people who might stick with the whole Q, keep trusting the plan, and how could that escalate as people become very frustrated and realize there is no plan? Because I think not everyone will decide to leave. So how will that come out in terms of possible future political violence and the continuation of disinformation?
Ricardo, how about you? What's your main fear regarding what's going on in the churches?
That this become the new religion for a lot of people, which looks like they are mixing Bible with these conservative ideas, and that they will continue spreading. And I think it's a challenge for the media to work with pastors, with priests, with imams, with rabbis, to really get them a pulpit to reach out to counter these kind of theories and this bad theology.
I don't know if Sandy, you want to add anything, you want to close?
Yes, well, I'm just so fascinated by the new presentation, the expansion. Each of you has given us an expanded understanding of this phenomenon. I guess I would ask what a sort of shrinking Trump figure means to this movement. Does Trump have to remain sort of supersized? And if he can't maintain his sort of supersized image, his presence, how will this affect both the far right, but in particular, this more religiously themed end of times movement?
Either of the speakers want to?
Yes, both of you. I'd like to just know, since this sort of began with the pictures of the insurrection, and Trump has been such a kind of consistent connector from 2016 on. What will his sort of lower profile mean? What will the sense of his being weak or having lost, being a loser, will this affect the movement you've been describing?
Maybe.
Sure. So you mentioned the far right. So I actually would really love to address that specifically. So I think with the far right, the thing that's really interesting and may surprise people that don't see these really, super overt white supremacist groups online, wherever, is that they actually quite often express a disdain for Donald Trump and his supporters. So, but the dangerous thing here is now that Trump has not backed his supporters in the way that they thought he would, including like, oh, he'll pardon us for the insurgency. We're just waiting for, a pardon from the president and we're all good. He'll call us out into the street. So I think the interesting thing is that there are a lot of really, not even like white supremacism light. These are like full-on neo-Nazi groups that are viewing this opportunity of disenfranchisement with Trump as a great chance to. I think you all have heard the term red pill, AKA that can also be translated as like basically radicalized. So that they view this as an opportunity to radicalize a lot of disillusioned Trump supporters and bring them into the fold of hardcore white supremacy. And I can share an article link actually where I looked at a lot of social media responses of these white supremacist individuals and even groups on Telegram, where they are very clearly discussing their strategies. So I think that could be extremely dangerous, and Trump supporters need to be warned about what's going on, because they can easily get sucked into this trap. And there are some who already know who are happy to go down the road of overt white supremacy. But for those that might not be totally on board with that, it would be great to warn them about this danger out there.
Ricardo. What will the diminishing Trump figure do, or will churches continue to believe that he's the chosen?
Save him.
Yes, I think they will continue supporting him regardless of what, because he gave them things that they wanted. They give him a Supreme Court dominated by conservatives, and he used really well the issue of abortion and LGBTQ community, same-sex marriage. That's something key for those conservative evangelicals. So it's going to be really, really hard. And also, as I said before, he gave them the U.S. Embassy in Israel, which is a huge challenge now in Jerusalem. I'm sorry. It's a huge challenge for Joe Biden. What he's going to do, getting back to Tel Aviv, let's see. So I think his solid base, it will remain there. But the work I've been doing and the work that we need to do is with the more moderate evangelicals, people I talk to on daily basis, and they can really understand what is the dangers. And we need to expand this kind of forum for more people involved in churches to really listen. It will be great for them to listen to Meili, because a lot of pastors, they don't know about where all this stuff is coming from.
Ricardo, and we have to mention that you are talking to us from Venezuela. You are from Venezuela, like I am. And Trump was very good in using Venezuela and the anti-socialist, anti-communist line, which I believe is a line. I don't believe he really cared. And certain actions that he took, and which is why he won a significant number of the vote in Florida. So that he used that too as well.
Yes.
Okay. Sandy?
Well, thank you both. And thanks to all three speakers for a fascinating hour. And really, it's been very, very helpful. You honored us with your thoughts, with your expertise.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.